Hello, everyone. I'm glad you made it to my presentation, Can Pentesters Match the Effectiveness of Blackheads? And I chose this topic because in my daily work as a pentester, I often need to answer to the same questions, which led me to the idea. This is something to talk about. Altogether, this will not be theoretical. There will be a practical example of a vulnerability I found previously. So, coming to the agenda, first there will be a quick introduction of our company, myself. Afterwards, we will jump directly into the first main topic, which is basically the preparation of a pen test. The next topic will be the question which always comes up, manual or automated testing. I needed to answer this one a lot. So, and last but not least, the standoff between blackhead and pentester.
Slides are not changing.
Oh, here it's changed. Okay. I'm sorry. No. Okay. Okay, sorry. Yeah, the last but not least, the standoff. Afterwards, short conclusion and questions and answers regarding this. So, first the introduction. We are Bosch altogether. Our main business sectors are the mobility solutions, industrial technology, energy and building technology, and of course the consumer goods. You know, BGSW stands for Bosch Global Software Technologies, and we have locations all over the world, from Poland over Mexico, India and Vietnam. In Poland, the engineering is the engineering center, and that's where we mainly focus on robotics and autonomous systems, and of course cybersecurity. A quick clip. It's not changing at all again, right? No. This is desynced somehow. Okay.
Our center in Poland will provide BGSW the ability to further strengthen its engagement with Bosch GBs and external partners by leveraging the geographical advantages and talent ecosystem of Poland.
Okay, so introduction of myself. My name is Maciej Nowak. I'm 35 years old, currently living in Poland, Gdańsk, and I'm a member of the SYNAC Red Team, a former full-time bug bounty hunter, and currently working as a cybersecurity engineer in BGSW. The first main part of this presentation is the preparation of the pen test. Now, to achieve, to perform a good pen test, we need to set our mindset. And our mindset should have, in my opinion, should have the goal to be as efficient as possible in this pen test. Now, to reach efficiency, we need a proper preparation. Is it? Yeah, it's coming. We need enough time for the pen test. I know this might be collides with efficiency, but time is definitely required to do it properly. And we need an open communication between customer and pen testing team altogether. Now, this point communication will come up more often in this presentation because I think this is a necessary requirement to do it properly. And it is good for the pen testing team if the customer points out critical functions. I know it's our job to identify it as pen testers, but telling us, hey, can you have a look on this specific function, we will definitely have some more rounds on this while performing the pen test. The next part is the preparation is the information gathering part of the pen test. Basically, we require, of course, the application's use case, meaning what's the application for? Is it a, I don't know, banking application, a shopping system, or whatever? Diagrams are always welcome because at this point it's nice to have a sheet where you see which services are connected to each other and which web server works with which database and so on. And technology stack is great because this has an impact on the efficiency directly, because we can skip the fingerprinting part while performing the pen test. User roles and description is another important thing. It is sometimes not easy to identify which user role should have access to which function. So having this cleared out is improving our efficiency as well. Of course, the API documentation and the Postman collection, so Swagger access are gold dust for us as well. Coming to the testing environment, we need multiple credentials before the pen test starts, meaning for each role of the application, we need 2 sets of credentials for each member of the pen testing team. This is required because there are some vulnerabilities which require 2 different sessions to compare the roles. Basically, if an unauthorized role can access a functionality which is not supposed to, it is easier when I can test it by myself and not need to ask my colleague, hey, can you give me your session, so I can compare it. This saves a lot of time. Now, dummy data. Having dummy data in the testing environment itself is necessary because we can identify which kind of data or which kind of strings the application itself expects at this moment. So whenever we can breach this idea, whenever we can breach this idea and insert signs which shouldn't be there, this might indicate a vulnerability as well. And of course, the whole environment needs to be as closest to the live environment as possible. We are saying that 2 different environments testing the one might give false positive or wrong results altogether. Now, blockers is a thing who sometimes come up, right? We try to avoid them with communication previously. But the most important thing is we are not enemies. Between pen testers and developers, there's often there are sparks in between sometimes because we need to explain our findings, and the developers, of course, say, no, that's nothing. Please keep in mind, we are working together as 2 units which should combine the forces to create a great product at the end. Now, again, the point, the clear communication is required to do so. It's easier to speak with a friend rather than with an enemy. A caretaker is a nice to have. I know that's not always possible, but having a caretaker on the side from the customer is great in case a blocker comes up. The caretaker is the person who prioritizes our questions and can resolve it immediately. Meaning sometimes pen testing an application might result in the application suddenly is not accessible anymore. It's possible, and it's nice to have someone who you can directly approach and ask him to boot it up again. And the scope definition is one very important thing which in the past led to blockers. And for this one, I created a separate slide. There are a lot of different scope definitions, and you need to be aware everything what is not mentioned in scope, we are not allowed to test. This is not because we chose so, but the law tells us. So when we are getting such an example of a scope, this one means to me I am only allowed to test on the subdomain login, on the top-level domain domain.com, and in the path admin. Now, one would say, okay, admin is fine, I just want to test what's inside that. But this scope definition does not tell me to test anything which is below the folder structure of admin. So any folder inside admin, logically, is not in scope, defining the scope. So to do it properly, if you want us to test everything, please add a wildcard. And at this moment, we know, okay, from here on, we are free, we can do. Why I mentioned the first example, in a previous project, it was a very large one that was a complete environment, embedded systems, cloud, mobile app, web front end, everything. And the customer delivered us the scope. And now there are a lot of hackers sitting there, all fired up to test the application. And instantly a blocker comes up. And the blocker came up because the login panel for this application was publicly facing. It's fine. But when I entered the credentials and sent it off, I noticed the requests are being sent to a complete different subdomain. At this point, this generated a blocker and stopped the complete test because any request went to, let's say, api.domain.com, okay? So this was not nice, and if there would be a caretaker, this would have been solved immediately. Now this scope definition is for us the best, I would say, because we are free to go on this domain, we can do everything, no limits. And if you want to specify specific files, you can give us the subdomain and use the wildcard whenever we can choose dynamically what to test for. Now the everlasting question, manual or automated testing. Often when it comes to time calculation, the customer asks why we proposed that time and another company proposed much less. Now, I think any pentest team works in a different kind of way, and due to experience, we adjust our work at some point. Now, I like manual testing because I can do something. I can add my own experience, my own knowledge to all that. Rather than automated testing, is more or less, I can do much. I can sometimes adjust the tools. Now, both the methods are having one goal, and it's to find vulnerabilities and bugs. And now, comparing them, the automated testing, basically, you can run automated. You can run more instances at one of the scanning engine, and you can test more targets at once. It runs quite frequently and consistently. It will definitely repeat the tests, always the same. And you can automate the tasks. So you can say, give me a report once a month and run in the background, or whatever. Now, the manual testing is which allows to identify application business flows just by observing the application, meaning when back then in previous days there was this shop CMS which had it basically was a simple shop. You could add articles to your cart. Afterwards you were asked if you want to check out as a guest or you want to register. And when you finished the payment process, you were redirected to a page which simply told you, thank you for your order, we will ship you articles or whatever you've bought, and that's fine. Now, the issue what was identified in this application was when you put an article into the shopping cart and just reached this moment where it asked you to register, you could simply access the thank you page by directly accessing it via the browser address bar, and the order will be fulfilled. Now, the system even recognizes this as a paid order, so they would send off the article. Now, emulation of the user engagement. When I'm starting and testing an application, I'm mostly trying to first use it as a normal user. I'm doing this to discover maybe not working functions and to inform the development team that it's not possible to test this function. And the other side is I want to see what was the idea of the developers, and I want to get a feeling for the application. So I'm browsing it and simply using all the forms without any payloads or any hacking. And all these points you can wrap up in applying human intelligence. And that's what I said before, the point where manual testing comes in. Saying that, I have prepared a practical example. I used cross-site scripting for this example. I know it's old and boring, but this case definitely helps me explain why I think manual testing is a very important part. It takes long, which mostly raises costs for the customer, but the results are much, much better. Now, cross-site scripting is basically if the attacker is able to execute JavaScript in your browser, he is able to redirect you, he's able to steal your cookies in some cases, he can do a lot. He can screenshot your website, he can do keylogging, and all this stuff. And XSS is a very, very common vulnerability. Now, mostly hackers, when they start learning, they are going for XSS. Now, coming to the test application for this example, the application basically was a board where you can create a topic and you can comment it. Now, this is the short version. Of course, there were other functions, but not of interest for this one. But there were some problems and limitations, of course. The first problem was I was only allowed to use the image tag in this case. Now, image tag altogether is no problem. You can use the image tag to introduce XSS. But to introduce XSS, you need something like event handlers, which are generally an attribute of the HTML tag. And say whenever something happens and it will trigger the dynamic JavaScript code. And yes, but these event handlers weren't allowed at this moment. So yeah, this vulnerability was discovered in my times when I was a bug bounty hunter, and I had a lot of time for that. So me sending this payload, it was like a lot. I want to show you the payload evolution of my final payload, which actually led to the XSS. Now I tried a lot of things. First, I sent a payload like this, and the application tried to somehow normalize it and added an alt attribute, which I didn't see before. I was quite curious, why are you adding another attribute with the same value of the source? It changes the complete payload, right? So I've gone ahead and I tried, and at some point I didn't even know what my goal was, to be honest, because in between of all these payloads I got a bit lost. I need to mention, between these payloads I've tried here, you can add 5 or 50 tries, which this is just like a shortcut, let's say. Now, I've tried a lot, and at some point I was thinking about adding a single quote rather than a double quote into the payload. Now, having 2 different quotes is quite an advantage, because mostly HTML uses double quotes. This is just something, but it accepts single quotes as well. So at this point of time, I somehow managed to extend my attack surface by adding, or by forcing the application to use the single quotes here. And this gave me the final advantage. Now, between this payload here and this one, there was, I think, a day of testing, and I got frustrated because I did some steps, but I wasn't able to create a proof of concept for this. So I just simply sent a very, very, very long string. And the application was like, oh, that's too long, I need to cut it. So it cut it. The allowed sign length afterwards, I identified was 65,535 signs. And when I removed some of that, the application started to try to append again this alt attribute. So I needed to just to remove 7 signs from this payload, and it appended the alt attribute with just an opening single quote. Now, the alt attribute is open. Any HTML afterwards is not interpreted as HTML. It will become the value of the alt attribute until the browser sees the next single quote in the HTML document, which is quite nice, because Look, I'm sorry for the quality of the screenshots. I wasn't able to get better ones, and I needed to heavily redact. There are some white boxes in this part. You can see this is the source, the HTML source, and my random string. And at the end, it opens the alt tag, and the closing div tag over here becomes not HTML, but the value of the alt tag. Now, this is quite nice. I just destroyed the endpoint. Like whoever accesses this will see a blank page because all the HTML isn't there, basically. So somewhere 200 lines below this, finally, I got this single quote. I found this single quote. And this is where the actual alt attribute ended. Now, I was really glad finding that, but I was tired from testing and trying and error, and I completely mixed up the experience I had with this application, so I needed a day or two to come with an easy solution to run this exploit finally. Now at this point, has anyone an idea, maybe, what to do here? No? How many actual developers are here? Can you please raise hands? Okay, great. Yeah, you guys. How many pentesters? And actual bug bounty hunters? Okay. Now, the solution was super easy. Okay, I skipped this slide now. The solution was super easy, and when you remember, the application had a comment function. So I came up with the idea, hey, I can create a comment to actually insert the single quote. But when I opened the endpoint, it was, of course, destroyed. There was no HTML. It was a blank page. So even this, I was so tired, I needed to rethink this. To enable the XSS, finally, I needed to create a new valid post without any payload to keep the endpoint working. Afterwards, I added a comment adding a single quote on error alert and a semicolon to finish the JavaScript functionality, and 2 slashes to comment out the REST HTML in this particular line of code. And afterwards, I edited the post and inserted the payload. And this finally looked like that. The image, the div tag, who is still the value of the alt attribute, you can see it hurts. Here is my comment, which definitely closes the alt attribute and allows me to inject the on-error event handler into this image tag. It was forbidden in the beginning, but in this context, I was allowed to post it because this string at all is not dangerous at all when you send it basically as a comment without being in the context of any HTML tag. Now, the rest was commented out, and the last greater than sign closed actually the image tag. So to break this down, we have an image tag with a source attribute, which is like ridiculously long, an alt attribute, which contains all the HTML, the on-error handler, and the alert box popping up and proving I was able to run JavaScript on this endpoint on each user who accesses this endpoint. So each user who accesses it, I am able to screenshot and do anything with his browser tab. So short, I think this is very easy to read. And this is basically the whole magic of it. Why I chose this example is to answer the question of manual or automated testing. And I would like to answer this now. Finally, it's both. In my opinion, automated testing should go along with manual testing. The automated testing checks a wide spectrum of vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, and old versions of, I don't know, any framework or whatever. It does it quite good. So you get data from it, but then you take the data and apply manual testing. So we will need to, after an automated test, you need to identify the false positive. So those both equals pentest to me. Now, finally, the standoff blackheads versus pentesters. This question is asked a lot now. Customer asks, why so much time? And I start to explain. Now, we have the motivation of those both parties. The blackheads basically have personal goals, religious, political. This is his motivation. He's maybe hired, so he's monetizing his skills. One other possibility. And mostly those guys are bored and curious. And now this might be a bit flat, but on the other side, the pentester simply gets paid for the job. And this maybe sounds, it sounds bad, but to be honest, we are doing the projects. We are doing them as best as we can, but at the end of the day, I'm getting paid. After the project is done, I'm switching to the next project. It is how it is. It's not possible for us to spend a year on one endpoint, right? Now, the mindset is another thing of those both parties. The pentester needs to find as much as possible and check for all the applicable methods in a quite short amount of time. Now, the black hat, he just needs to find one vulnerability he really requires. So when he's going for your database data, he will check for SQL injections. If he wants to add your servers to his botnet, he will have a lot of methods to do that. Remote code executions, even XSS can do this. Now, the difference in the approach altogether, the pentester starts immediately, okay? The project, kick off and go. We start hacking. We don't require fingerprinting because we got the technology stack before. Credentials are available for us, 2 sets of each role. And whenever something comes up, we can always cast the caretaker. So we don't need, for the approach itself, we don't require that much time. But the black hat spends a lot of time on reconnaissance. He will, this is the part which takes most, because he has no idea about the application, he needs to identify the endpoints, and he needs to see what's running on them. And afterwards, most probably, he will even start monitoring them. So whenever he finds an endpoint which responds simply with a blank page, he starts monitoring this, and whenever the response of this endpoint will be different, he will be notified. That's how I do it. Now, fingerprinting is a part of reconnaissance, and he will do this along with this reconnaissance part. And depending on the target, sometimes he's able to register, sometimes he's not. Sometimes he can even get a demo of the whole application with admin credentials at all, which is, I think, a great source for him. And he needs to find a way to get all this information. It's not like they're lying around. He somehow needs to put the puzzle together. Now the limits, and this is a very, very important part. The limits we care of is the scope. We care about the law, and we care about the time. We need to send off the report on time, right? Now the black hat, basically, his limits are his personal limits, his motivation, his skill, his resources. I put time in there too, because he has a lifespan, as we all, and he has most probably a family or whatever. So time, but his time limit is different. Ours is defined, and his is dynamic. Now, I found this picture, and I would like to use this to explain this by visualizing this. We got the law who tells us the speed limit of 25 miles per hour. Now, there are we who are working along with it, okay? 25 miles, I will not overstep, or I will break the law. And then there's this black hat who basically doesn't care. And he sets the highest score. He will find the most impactful vulnerability in your application when there's not enough time for us pentesters to test it properly. So it's not like we are using the time just for fun. It's because we require it. Coming to a conclusion of the presentation. Now, we've spoken about how to prepare a pentest. Let's work together, not against each other. It's no competition. We all do mistakes, and basically, these mistakes are guaranteeing us our job. So, no hard feelings. We have talked how to prevent blockers, and even when they come up, we know how to solve them in the best ways, having a direct partner to approach, to ask. And it's manual and automated testing, and not or. Now, the difference between the daily work of a pentester and a black hat. I think I mentioned the most important parts or the most important topics regarding that. Yeah, that was it. Now we have a lot of time for questions and answers. Is there any question? Yes, please. Okay. 1 second, please. We will get a mic. Ah.
Do you use any GPT models for like use cases?
Can you repeat, please? I'm sorry.
Do you use any GPT models to like trace use cases in your pen testing work?
No. My personal background is like I was a freelance hacker, so basically, you know, when you do this, you create your own way, your own methods, your own approach, and of course, you need to improve it. So this is definitely a topic I should like care about, and I'm not saying I will not use it at all, but I need to see how I can use this for my personal advantage, right? Yes, please.
What tools are you using?
What tools?
What tools do you use?
Okay, so of course we have Burp Suite as the, let's say, Swiss Army knife for penetration testing. And mostly I'm using this. I'm trying to apply my payloads manually. But of course there's a lot of tools which simply help you being more efficient again, like testing the TLS versions. You can cover all this by using smaller tools. I don't want to name names because there's so much of them, and I think any one of us needs to figure out which tool is the best for him and for his use cases. So basically, it's Burp. Any more questions?
Do you do any kind of low-level pen testing, not only like web, but something like devices or mobile or any other
Yes, everything. From chip to cloud, you name it, we test it. So we have a large team altogether. I'm mostly part of the mobile, cloud, and web applications, but we also have a very skilled embedded team for embedded testing and all what comes with it, with proper labs. Any more questions? Okay, thank you. So one final word, we are hiring, and please feel free to scan the QR code for the job descriptions. And thank you very much.